Too hot for TV.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Doctor Who, Too Hot for TV. Now, we've got a bit of a change this time. Jack is not here for this episode. Instead, I am joined by Doctor Who fan Gareth Preston. Gareth, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Hello.
Great to have you here. So, we're going to cover a very specific Doctor Who thing today, which we'll get to in a bit. But first of all, I just wanted to know, how did you get into Doctor Who?
It's something I've been into pretty much since I was a kid. My first clear memory of Doctor Who is Carnival of Monsters.
Right.
I remember seeing the moment in episode 1 where an orderly gets shot. And that really scared me at the time. I mean, looking at it now, it's fairly, just a conventional zap, and he's gone. But at the I must have been into it because Dad bought me the Radio Times 10th anniversary special, and it's something that's pretty much stayed with me ever since.
Yeah, it seems to for most people. I feel like you either watch it for a year or two and grow out of it, or it's with you forever. Even if it takes a little bit of a back burner here and there, it never goes away. So what about your involvement with fandom as a whole?
I first really became aware of fandom when I started buying the Doctor Who monthly at the right time of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who season.
Right.
And they did that marvellous cover with the 5 Doctors and an archive on one story from each of them. So I was aware of fandom, and then a few years later, weirdly, I was looking for the original Dalek model kit that Sevens released. And it was very hard to get hold of at the time, but whilst I was searching for it, a guy in a toy shop said, "Oh, there's another guy who comes in here who's a Doctor Who fan, and I think he's got a bit of a club going if you want." So I passed on my details, and this guy, Ian, got in touch, and I discovered the whole world of, oh my word, there are people with VHSs of old episodes, which kind of blew my mind at the time. And then quickly from there into fan films and fanzines.
So you've had involvement with various sort of fan films, fan videos, spin-offs and things like that. Could you just run us through some of the highlights of that?
Yes, there was quite a few lot of fan filmmakers in the Northwest. So got involved in the periphery of 1 or 2 of those, made a couple of absolutely appalling Who videos of my own that sadly still seem to be out there somewhere. I think they were put onto a compilation tape.
Right.
And occasionally I still get some, "Oh, you did Terror on Drexel Free."
Well, somebody must be liking them somewhere, even if you're not too fond of them yourself.
Yeah, they're very much early. It's just a bunch of kids running around in a park, basically, with somebody dressed as a very crude Cyberman. Basically, we got one of those all-over DIY disposable suits with cardboard additions to it, Cyberman. And along the way, I also discovered the audio visuals and thought these are actually brilliant. And I thought, oh, here's a way of making Doctor Who that doesn't look utterly naff. As it's still, you're doing it for an audience, so you've got that discipline of trying to make it as good as you can. So we started making our own audios, which we called the Fine Line Productions. And they built up a little bit of a following, but they were a very useful training ground for just learning how to write, how to edit other people's stuff. And eventually it was those who kind of got me a foot in the door with BBV. Through a mutual friend who sort of knew Bill Baggs, and he says, "Oh, this guy's pretty good." And I think he gave him a copy of one of my stories, which was called Trick of the Light.
Right.
And Bill liked it. So out of that grew Sontaran's Conduct Unbecoming. And then also I post-produced one of the non-Doctor Who stories called The Pattern. And because of Conduct Unbecoming has a certain comic element to it, I thought, oh, this guy was under the impression that I could write comedy.
Yeah.
So from there, that grew into, do you have a license to save our planet? So that was a nice period, that around the turn of the century.
And did it feel like a little community of fans there together, sort of
It
at
did.
BBV?
It did. It did feel like there was this little community. There was Bill and Paul Ebbs and Alistair Locke, and then there was the kind of the guys doing the big finish. And
Yeah.
I feel like there was a little community of us doing it, and I even sort of went down to one or two of the Fitzroy Tavern meetings
Right.
at the time, which was a bit of a pilgrimage for me, coming from way up in the north down into the big smoke. So, but yes, there was that this feeling of a little community and a little bit of friendly rivalry, and I remember Gary Russell sort of like teasing us, sort of like, is there anything else out of Robert Holmes's grave can you exhume to make a BBV out of?
I mean, it's interesting that Gary Russell would say that, because I mean, I always thought that the monster stuff was the stronger stuff that BBV did in those audio ranges, and I think it was on purpose that Big Finish strayed away from not only using those monsters, but using many of the monsters from the Doctor Who back catalogue when they first started. It very much felt like they were trying to tell new tales just about the Doctors with nothing else, whereas BBV, in many ways, were the more sort of fan-friendly, I guess you'd say.
I think, yes, to some extent. I think it for a while it felt like a nice coexistence. We were taking these old properties, but doing something different with them because the Doctor wasn't there, so making them the star of their own stories made them more, I think, a nice original slant on them.
And you know, especially the Sontaran stuff, I think it's some of the strongest stuff that BBV do. I don't really think there's a misfire there at all. Did you feel there was a lot to do with the Sontarans that hadn't been done on screen?
I did once I was given it, because I didn't. Basically, Paul said to me, "Do you want to do a Sontaran story?" And naturally, I said, "Yes, please." And I remember his main sort of script note was that they're not Klingons.
That's a good note. It's a good note.
Yeah, it is a useful note. It kind of steers you away from making drone on about honour and codes all the time. I sort of locked into that kind of, particularly Time Warrior, because I think Time Warrior is a brilliant story, and I love the alienness of Links. There's so much he doesn't understand about humans.
Yeah.
And that very alien viewpoint. So that was sort of one of my starting posts for my story. And the other thing was that for a clone race, all the Sontarans had been very different. Everyone saw them. So I thought, well, it's that, the Sontarans have got this propaganda that they're all identical super warriors, but in fact, there's quite a lot of variety between them. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And that kind of took me into politics. And it was that time when House of Cards was on BBC. So it was like, oh, really behind the scenes, they're not really this monolithic race. There's also actions going on. And that turned into Conduct Unbecoming.
How did Do You Have a License to Save This Planet come about, and with all the sort of separate elements and monsters thrown in?
That went through a lot of changes from the initial sort of, I think Bill wanted to do a comedy. Actually, initially Sylvester McCoy wasn't involved. Initially it was going to be a comedy starring George Telfer, who played the villain in the Auton series.
Yeah.
And originally, he was going to be a sort of Doctor Who surrogate. Myself and Paul thought, it'd be quite funny, because at that time, there seemed to be a lot of these Doctor Who surrogates around.
Yeah.
In that 90s period. Let's do a kind of a send-up of that whole business of the Doctor Who surrogate and monsters that are almost, but not quite, the actual monsters. And that's where the whole idea came, that the Cyberons were very conscious that they weren't. They had this real crushing inferiority complex about it. In retrospect, it was probably a bit too fanish. It was one of those things that, maybe outside of the community, a lot of people wouldn't really get these jokes. But so anyway, so it started off, and it was going to be George Telfer in a kind of Victorian frock coat. And because myself and Paul had largely done radio, it was largely it was a radio script in many ways. It was quite a dialogue heavy sort of story. And Bill says, no, it's got to be a lot more visual. So we tried to make it more visual. And then Bill says, oh, I've got Sylvester McCoy. Retool it for try and put in those kind of 7th Doctor references like the spoons. And then, so we wrote this script. And then by the time I turned up on filming, it felt like a lot of the script had been thrown out and we were just sort of improvising.
I see.
On the actual day. I think that's one of the reasons it feels very random. That video, because I think a lot of it was kind of made up a bit on the spur of the moment.
That kind of makes sense. I mean, it's one of those videos where I think that like the core of the ideas are very good and there's some jokes in there, but it feels a little rushed to me when I watch it. Like perhaps Bill's direction, he didn't take as much time as he should have done to make sure things landed right and stuff like that. And as you say, if there was more sort of improvisation, maybe some of those jokes didn't land either.
I think that is part of it. I mean, I still occasionally meet people who say, oh yeah, I like that. And it's always a pleasant surprise.
At the time, I very much enjoyed it. And I remember it being launched at one of the Battlefield conventions, I think.
It wasn't quite finished, but it got a really good reaction. And then when we did the finished one, for some reason, it didn't quite land properly. But I remember I was there for the film. I play one of the Cyberons in it.
Right.
And I think I play an Auton as well. But certainly, I can remember it took me back to my fan film days of you're constantly racing. Usually, you've only got that day. That's the only day you've got all these people together. And in fact, that's, I think, the biggest problem with fan film and, as it turns out, fan audio. It's actually just getting these people in the room together. But it's that constant, we got to get all this done before the sun goes in, or before so-and-so needs to get the train back. So that was kind of the feeling on Do You Have a License?
How many days was it shot over? A couple of days? 1 day? Two, three, 4?
It was 2 days. I was there for the second day, because for some reason I couldn't make the first day. Probably work-related. Yeah, so we fitted a lot in, and am I allowed to plug your book? I don't.
You can do. I always do.
Because in Downtime, that marvelous book all about the so-called wilderness years.
That's very kind of you. Very kind of you. I don't actually use the term wilderness years once in that book.
Oh, well, that's good. Because it wasn't. It was the fertile years.
Yeah.
But I remember, and I said at the time, sort of like that Bill had asked me and Paul, oh, can you come up with a few more jokes like for the ending? And I remember sitting in the bar of this Freemasons Lodge with Sylvester McCoy and just my mind a blank. Thinking, oh, and I'm sitting in front of Sylvester McCoy and I'm letting him down. We can't think of any because we threw 1 or 2 ideas, but nothing that ends up in the film.
So we've covered a bit of your fandom and your background, but today we're here to talk about one particular Doctor Who extended universe thing, one particular Doctor Who spin-off, possibly one of the earliest ones that you're a big fan of. Do you want to tell the listeners what you've chosen to talk about?
We have chosen to talk about the TV-21 Daleks, which ran from 1965 to 1967.
Yeah, now these have become known as the Dalek Chronicles, the Dalek Tapes, but at the time they were just simply known as the Daleks. Is that correct?
That's right. The Daleks by Terry Nation, although apart from collecting the checks, it seems it was David Whittaker who did most of the work.
I mean, a lot can be said about Terry Nation and that sort of thing, I think.
I mean, actually, I've just recently read that book on Terry Nation. And actually, I've just come off a Blake 7 marathon as well. So actually, I've got a lot of time for Terry Nation.
Okay.
But he was happy to slap his name on things, basically.
Yeah. I mean, he was sort of creating a brand in terms of a writer when people weren't really thinking about these things. Certainly, there are very few other writers of that period, like from any genres, that you would really see that people maybe not the general public, although I'm sure some did, but certainly people in the media knew the name more than perhaps anybody else's, because he was sort of aware of that brand awareness, I think.
He was. I think he was ahead of his time in putting that whole brand. I mean, yeah, how many more other 60s writers can most people name? I mean, you can name quite a few.
Yeah.
But in terms of well-known writers, Terry Nation is probably what people are. I mean, some people think Terry Nation made and created Doctor Who for them.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of how his name kind of gets banded around, as he's known as a name associated with Doctor Who, and they know they had something to do with the creation. Most people Daleks, but yeah, as you say, some people think that. And he's got a prolific career, and I mean, I haven't read the book, but I think sometimes people are a little dismissive of his work because it can appear samey. But then that was at a time when television was disposable. But also, I think he probably was happy to put his name on things and run because he was busy writing something else. He created Blake Seven, he wrote loads of ITC stuff and things like that. So he was a very prolific writer. And look at Stephen Moffat. We all know that writers tend to reuse ideas or themes again and again and again, even now.
That is true. There are certain tropes of Terry Nation that we love to. He was very influenced, I think, by sort of John Buchan, and you see that in a lot of his Doctor Who stories. That the Doctor's always he improvises, and I mean MacGyver, which Terry Nation was involved in.
Right.
Days, another hero who kind of improvises his way out of scrapes, and it's something that the Doctor does a lot. You notice in Terry Nation stories.
So, how did you first discover these comic strips?
First of all, it was in the Amazing World of Doctor Who, which was the free annual given away by Typhoo Tea.
Yeah, I think I've got a copy of that somewhere.
Yes, I saved up my tokens, and along with for the poster and the book, and there in the book we have retitled. I think it's retitled "The First Step." Eve of the War basically was reprinted.
Yeah,
and I was just amazed at this artwork. This beautifully colourful, very detailed. Everything looks like it can work basically in these strips, and it's so bright and vibrant and colourful. So yeah, that made quite an impression on me. I remember used to make lots of Lego models of sort of Dalek sources based on those pictures that were in that book.
I think they've become sort of quite iconic in a way, and they cram so much into them. They're these sort of vast space operas told over one page, like the vistas, and there's these huge landscapes and huge ideas that could never be conceived on the screen at the time. It's just really amazing stuff.
It's so impressive. It gave the Daleks this huge space empire and these cities with giant buildings, huge arcs and domes, and things like the hoverbouts, the Dalek flying discs, which before Daleks could fly themselves. And their influence, I mean, certainly in the new series, when those Dalek saucers appear in other ways, they've come straight out of a TV21 strip.
I think so too. And even things like the big gold Emperor Dalek, Big Finish tried to use it on one of their covers, and I know it was vetoed by the Nation estate, but it appears in some comics as things like that, later comics in Doctor Who magazine as well, I think. That big gold Emperor's never really gone away.
It's true, yes. Obviously paid homage to in remembrance of the Dalek, with the globe-shaped Emperor, and he is quite a recognisable character. He feels it's a surprise. You kind of feel like he's an official part of Doctor Who, even though he isn't.
I love that in the very first story, Genesis of Evil, which sort of. They say Genesis of Evil, but these titles are sort of unofficial. They've just been adopted by fandom. There is a moment where the Emperor, the first Dalek goes, "I'll be the Emperor and I need my special gold casing," and they create it for him.
Yes, I think if I remember right, he actually says it involves petals as well. Petals melded into the gold to make it extra special as well, and he's got all the big blinking lights at the back. A genius idea. I mean, I suppose whether that was just I don't know if it was described in the script that it should look like that, or that was Richard Jennings kind of coming up with that idea. But it's a brilliant strike. It's a nice, very simple. It goes back to that maxim that classic monsters are easy to draw.
Yeah.
Easy to draw yourself an emperor.
In fact, in many ways, it's easier to draw than the normal Dalek because it's got it's kind of the big round features means it's got more intricate things. So kids could probably draw that over a normal Dalek, although I'm sure they'd give the normal Dalek a good go. So that first story gives us the Emperor Dalek. It also gives us an alternative an alternative origin for the Daleks to what we got in the Daleks on TV and what we got in Genesis of the Daleks, although keeping the same basic principles of Daleks v Thals.
I mean, you can tell it's sort of drawn from what we learned in that first Dalek story. I mean, they've make it a bit more comic strip and a bit. Again, it's this thing about making it all bigger and more dramatic. So they're blue men, as they were called back then. And it's interesting to think that, that was, until Genesis of the Daleks comes along, that is the origin of the Daleks.
Yeah.
As far as fans are concerned. Whether there were any fans back in 1976 going, oh, this is outrageous. Change the mythology.
If we've learned anything from Doctor Who fandom, there will have been a group somewhere. They just didn't have a platform in order to share their anger with the world. But I'm sure there was someone going, "This isn't how it worked."
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a bit pulpy and it's a bit over the top. It's a bit more child friendly. Like even more than the TV show, and there's these wonderful ideas of like the inhabitants of Salazar over the ocean of ooze and things like that. That is very. You might have got that in some early Terry Nation scripts, but I think certainly by sort of 66 and things like that, ideas like that were less common in the main show. But I just really liked it. But at the same time, the explosion, the poison landscape, and things like that is kind of more horrific than anything the television show could have done.
Definitely, you can't imagine, looking at anything as dramatic. And of course, it has the advantage because it's a comic strip. If it had been the TV show, it would have been that same stock footage of a nuclear explosion you've seen 100 times in various films. Whereas, it looks absolutely appalling and grim, like you say. It looks in the colours that they use for that explosion. I mean, it looks, war is. The early war scenes in that story are pretty grim,
and they don't hold back at all on things like that. But they tell that whole story in 3 pages, which is pretty amazing. That they just managed to cram it all in.
Yeah, so we get this simple, that first appearance of we've invented this new suit to protect our soldiers, and then that first time they see first time a Dalek speaks with that distinctive font. That was another genius idea, giving the Daleks that jagged, sort of square font.
And that's carried on even today. Like I think in the comic strips, when you see Daleks, they have the jagged font. It
has become. That's how comic strip Daleks talk in the same way. It's like Vorp. It's just one of those things that works.
So once you've had that initial genesis of evil, as they call it, it moves on to what sort of becomes the standard format for these comic strips, which is a 7-part story. It does change up every now and then, but 7 parts, 7 pages seems to be the main thing. And then this next one, Power Play, we get a slave ship that lands who are after the sand, which is such a 1960s sort of 1950s sci-fi idea that these people are here to mine the special sand of Skaro. And of course, this being David Whittaker and Terry Nation, something that features a lot in this and the other ones is it's magnetized sand, and there's lots of talk of magnets in every single, like in all of these comics.
That is stuff. Yes, it's. I mean, at the time, reading it as these things when I was younger, it made complete sense. I mean, you get that marvelous visual of the Daleks rising up out of the sand, which of course is something that the TV show would use. Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting in these strips that certain ideas that David Whittaker would be putting into Power of the Daleks, and Evil of the Daleks, get a first outing in this, and in Power Play, in many ways, anticipates Power of the Daleks, with the Daleks pretending to be nice and helpful.
Yeah, you get that a few times, I think, within these strips, that the Power of the Daleks thing, and that there are certainly a lot of ideas that have got Terry Nation's name on here, but we know that David Whittaker probably had a lot to do with them. And also, I think the magnet, I guess, is it's possibly one of the earliest scientific ideas that a child would get, like how a magnet works. So perhaps that's why it's something that's used so often.
I think that's a very astute observation. I think it is one of the first things we learn before school. There's no point talking about quantum physics at this.
By that second set of adventures, that Power Play, it feels a little bit more Flash Gordon to me all of a sudden, with, you've got sort of escaping slaves and things like that, and there's heroes and villains, but the Daleks still remain this sort of maleficent force in the background.
We've gone into the more traditional fare of most of TV21, which has plenty of escapes and captures going on in most of its strips.
After that, we move on to what's known as Duel of the Daleks, and it's about an invincible Dalek called Zeg challenging the Emperor to be the leader of the Daleks.
This is quite a fun one. It's the first one that kind of... the strip had this kind of rule that if sort of like the Daleks came up against human sort of adversaries, they had to lose. They came up against more monsters or other robots or themselves, it gives them a bit more wiggle room. You can have, and in this one, you actually have the Emperor kind of being heroic in a way. Sort of, in that they go into the jungle and have the duel between him and Zeg, to prove who's strong enough to lead the Daleks. And again, it's that thing where it's the improvising skill of the Emperor in this case that wins the day. And
something that becomes increasingly more obvious in this one and continues throughout the series. Obviously, he's Dalek Zeg, he has a name. There's much more individual personalities to some of these Daleks.
You do get kind of Daleks having conversations with each other in a way it's hard to imagine the TV Daleks having. You do kind of get Daleks, they'll be doing an experiment or something, or just kind of doing their job, watching the skies or something, and they will have these slightly conversational sort of dialogues with each other.
I think I've kind of maintained this thing that the Daleks on TV in the 60s, up until Dalek's Master Plan, aren't quite the Daleks yet. Because the first time you see them, you don't know you're going to see them again. And then you see them in Dalek's Invasion of Earth, and then you see them in The Chase. And they work, but they're not quite as manipulative, and they're not quite as alien and as menacing as they then become by Dalek's Master Plan. And once you get to that point, it feels like the template's set. I don't know whether you agree with that at all, but
I think that's
before that.
I think that's actually a fair point. There is a little bit more experimentation in those. I think they are fairly well influenced by Dalek Invasion. There's little bits around the most obvious thing being the junior Dalek in this, who occasionally kind of gets things wrong and gets a bit flustered sometimes. Mm-hmm. But certainly more in these because it is their own strip and they don't. In these strips, the Daleks definitely have a little bit more personality, and there's more sense that they are an alien race and exploring. I mean, the strip is, as we will discover shortly, it is kind of a history of the Daleks. We started off. Power Play is the first time they're encountering other races.
Yes.
And gradually we'll see the Empire build up.
Yeah, I mean, when we get to the next story, the Amaryl Challenge, I think it's become known. Certainly it feels like almost it's the Daleks learning how to Dalek. They learn of space travel, they learn of space aliens. And I think in that story, you kind of see them discovering their mantra of sort of conquer and destroy, because they land on this planet and they kind of go exploring and they realize it's hostile, and so full of essentially talking flowers that talk to each other, and they just go out there and go, right, if we can't conquer this world, then we destroy everything.
It is quite a dramatic. I mean, that's something that would they be allowed to get away with that on TV? But in their own strip, they can do this, bit of genocide and just wipe out a planet.
I think it helps that obviously it's talking flowers, so it's not got all talking plants, but it's also got this amazing bit of artwork with flowers growing out of the Daleks, and it's quite a beautiful little painting, and it's very Yellow Submarine. I don't know if you remember in the Yellow Submarine cartoon that all flowers grew out of all the blue meanies and stuff.
There is that bit. That is a striking bit of art. That it's almost a kind of Dalek body horror,
Yeah.
They suddenly erupting out with vegetation.
Mm-hmm. Then they move on to the Penta-Ray Factor, which is an 8-part story where the Daleks arrive on a peaceful planet pretending to come in peace again, but they're actually after the weapons of the planet. It sort of starts off feeling a little bit like the Dominators to me, before you realise that the locals are a bit more action-orientated.
Because they're all in the very sort of the Roman kind of togas and cloaks, so it has that feel. Again, it's that we're going back to that power of the Daleks idea of they manipulate one of the people on the planet. He's an ambitious sort of leader who wants to overthrow, and he thinks, like so many people will discover in the future, that allying yourself with the Daleks is not a good idea. They never learn. They never learn. Again, it's that playing people off against each other. And Daleks are quite good at manipulating people. They certainly understand things like greed and ambition and can be used. And it's got the marvellous Penta-Ray. Again, it's that kind of child's kind of science. Why is it wonderful? Because it's got 5 different kinds of rays combined together. And that's child logic. And it helps that it is very well drawn. The Penta-Ray machine looks, this big, glossy, powerful. It looks like a super weapon.
It's but again, this is aimed at very young kids. Like, we're poring over this years later as adults. At the time, it's seen as a disposable comic for kids, and it's amazing that there's so much attention to detail and love put into these drawings, because even when the ideas are quite basic, like the Penta-Ray.
Absolutely. I think that's something that stands out about TV21 in general, is the amount of care that's put into these children's comics. Compare it to a lot of similar children's comics of the time, and even into the 70s, which are a lot more cruder and throwaway and less imaginative.
So we move on from there to one of my favourites of the run, one called Plague of Death, where after an accident, the Daleks are plagued by a radioactive dust that eats Dalek casings, which I think is a brilliant idea. I'm surprised it hasn't really been done on TV. I know that Resurrection of the Daleks has a bit of a thing of that foamy stuff, but I just really love this idea.
It is, and it's really interesting. It's a very clever bit of writing, actually, from Dave, to put the Daleks on such a back foot. If you don't exactly root for them, perhaps, but you are kind of, how on earth are they going to get out of this? Because at first it seems such a powerful threat.
Yeah, and the Daleks certainly seem a bit more emotional in this one, obviously, because they're dying. One of them actually says the agony as it dies, which you wouldn't hear on the TV show. And there just seems to be, they panic, and there's a bit of regret in there and stuff like that. And in fact, you almost see them nearly get wiped out in this story. Obviously, they're the star of the show, so they're not going to be. But it does feel like, is this going to be the end for a moment?
So it's a good example of how David Whittaker could keep the strip sort of fresh whilst not betraying what the Daleks are by having them, how are they going to get out of this one?
From there, they do just about get out of it, obviously, and we go into one of my favourite titles, The Menace of the Monstrons, which is probably the most 1950s sci-fi B-movie title you could give anything.
It is, it's a glorious title. We really have to acknowledge in this one, as marvellous as the art is, the monstrons themselves are a little problematic.
They are, yes. They seem to be a caricature of people of colour with negative connotations.
Unfortunately, yes, they do have a kind of that kind of caricature. Although they are blue, a dark blue.
Yeah.
So rather like Tarzan Wenchang, it's something we'll just have to regret and move on.
But I do think it's important that we point it out to people and go, look, there is some racial insensitivity within this that is by no means acceptable in modern day standards. But we do have to move on from there and just enjoy the comics for what they were at the time.
Too hot for TV.
What I like about the Monstrons is they land in a volcano, which is exactly the sort of thing that this strip does best. It's like the most fantastical element. It's like, where are we going to land? That volcano seems like a safe space.
It is, and it's a beautiful bit of artwork. I love that sort of that geodistic dome kind of spaceship inside the crater of the volcano. It looks great. And then a few frames later, we got that huge robot arm reaching out to grab a Dalek out of the sky.
I mean, the Monstrons really put the Daleks through their paces after they've almost been destroyed by this radioactive dust, don't they?
There is again, there's this sense of the Daleks are on the back foot, I should say, for most of this story. It does seem that they are outclassed at first by the Monstrons and their robot servants. I mean, I love all the artwork of the robots come out and they've got this sort of liquid steel, I think it's called, or liquid metal, and they sort of bury the whole Dalek city underneath this liquid metal. And it's beautifully done in terms of artwork. And then it allows the Daleks, or one Dalek in particular, to have this, well, we've got to say, a moment of heroism.
Yeah, and not only a moment of heroism, but you also see a Dalek's thought bubble.
Which is unusual, and it is this tragic moment. He's got this Dalek who thinks, I am the last Dalek.
What's he do? He raises his internal temperature?
That's basically it, yeah. Turns himself into a bomb.
It's great stuff. As you say, there's some problematic elements, as there are with a lot of old bits of TV and comics, but it is an enjoyable little story. And it's the Daleks kind of get back on form after that, don't they? After their two near defeats. So in the Eve of War, they're back on a couple of missions of conquests in space when one of the Daleks goes insane and starts attacking the other Daleks, and this is because of a thing called the suspicion ray that has been beamed in by the mechanoids, and a battle ensues.
Yes, and the mechanoids were just made for comic strip because they've got, again, it's that thing, they have a beautifully clear design to them and they look great. And I do love the opening of the story, which I've read many times, with the Dalek going sort of like a cloud in space, sort of
yeah.
And then the cloud engulfs it, and there's quite a bit of Daleks pondering, how could it be a cloud in space?
I love the mechanoids. I think they're a great design, and I really, as you say, they're made for comics, but I would happily see them on television any day of the week. I just think, obviously, we know that the props were too cumbersome and big to really use again, so we never saw them, but they're really great in this, and I'm all for seeing them pop up anywhere. This is the one where the artwork changes midway through, isn't it?
Yes, this is it. We've had Richard Jennings' marvellous, as I say, painterly style, very kind of classic children's storybook illustration going on now, and then suddenly Ron Turner comes along, and it's a much cleaner lines. It's much more comic book looking, but he's still great at putting in details, and he's very fond of grooves. Everything's kind of got these nice go faster grooves in them.
Yeah.
Machinery. And even the monsters are a bit like that. He's very good, because it allows him to do all this nice shadow and shade work.
The colour palette seems to change a little bit more, and it becomes brighter, I think, and it's like blues and yellows that start to stick out more.
Yes, it definitely looks brighter. The early stuff, yeah, it all looks a little bit Yeah, just a little bit subdued, and some a
Yeah,
little bit more realistic, the early ones, and then
yeah.
it's 100% comic power now.
It's also when the Daleks turn into more of the movie Daleks.
And in fact, these are the Daleks that will later appear on first Target book.
Oh yeah, of course, of course.
Yes, he very much Chris based his design on that Ron design.
I mean, they look great, and my favourite Daleks of the '60s are the movie Daleks, and so in turn, these ones, like they just look powerful, and they do this amazing thing in this comic where they put the sucker and the gun a bit further apart, so it looks like the Daleks are exclaiming a bit more, and it gives them more movement from frame to frame.
It does, surprisingly, they do seem quite expressive. It's amazing how much expression they get out of something that has no face, but somehow
Yeah.
stay with it between the arms and the eye stalk and the angles that he draws them at. They seem a very dynamic sort of race.
It's kind of a testament to everybody involved in this that you're able to get an interesting, what turns out to be over 100 stories long run of things about the Daleks, because most people would say the Daleks don't really work without the Doctor, and obviously later on you get Dalek Empire, but it brings in its own human characters. But really, they managed to keep the Daleks interesting over this huge long run.
It is very impressively done, and and David Whittaker comes up with some, like I say, he keeps coming up with clever twists on you. You'd think it would be a set formula, and he keeps finding the clever twists to throw another contrast. Here we have the Daleks versus another robot race that seems just as powerful. And there's some nice bits of continuity. I like at the start of this story, there's this sense of the Dalek, because they were nearly defeated by the Monstrons and they've had the radioactive dust. I think the Emperor says something like, now we must rebuild and make sure this never happens again.
But you think the Daleks must be constantly having that conversation with themselves in the TV show as well, because they're always just about to conquer the universe and then the Doctor stops them. So they must be quite used to rebuilding.
Absolutely. They must somehow turn this negative into a positive.
And then there's the Archives of Fern, and then after that, we move on to the Rogue Planet, in which the Daleks alter the course of a comet and send it straight towards the Mechanoids, their main enemies for the moment.
It's a nice dynamic one, this. I love all the artwork of the Rogue Planet is burning, that opening spread showing how this comet is created, and with the big solar system and crashing through the rings of the planet and all that's lovely artwork on there. And then we get a nice and then we're introduced to a new heroic robot.
That moves on to the next story, isn't it? Impasse. They're kind of linked together, to be honest, because this is basically the Daleks sort of send a comet towards the Mechanoids, and then with Impasse, this other race of people can sort of smell this war brewing between the Daleks and the Mechanoids. They're the people of the planet Zeros, and they send Agent 2K to avert the war.
Agent 2K is another nice design. It's that kind of sleek grooves, and it's quite a formidable character.
Yeah, he's brilliant, and he's got that. He's got a drill on his head, which is I think is fantastic. It's another classic '60s sci-fi invention, but it looks a little bit Metropolis, but it's kind of beefed up, I think, to be more kind of kid friendly and exciting.
Yeah, it almost feels. I mean, I don't think there was anyone was seriously thinking of an Adventures of 2K spin-off strip.
Yeah,
It somehow feels like a backdoor pilot.
Yeah, it does, and you could well see him showing up in other things, but this is the only time we ever really hear of him. Also, in this one, the Mechanoids, who are supposed to be this great enemy, suddenly this is the last they appear in the comics, I think.
It is a shame that I don't know if there's a specific reason why they turn up, and it's a shame really, because I'm like you, I'm a big fan of the Mechanoids. I think they're a great design.
But the Zerons, I think as they're called, affect that, like, stop the war from happening via Agent 2K, and you think, okay, well, they'll be back in a few strips' time, but no, they're just done. Apparently, the Zerons created peace in the galaxy.
It's a shame because I was quite looking forward because you get all this nice build up. Oh, it's going to be this super war between Daleks and Mechanoids, and it's which when you're young, that's what you want to see, really. You don't want to see peace break.
Yeah, and also that's sort of indicative of how the strip ends. We won't jump too far forward to it, but this basically builds up to two big wars twice and then never shows them. Now, sometimes they do that sort of stuff in the TV series because they can't afford to show it. Here is the perfect medium for them to be able to go, we can do a big war. And as much as you get all these amazing images, we never actually see the big wars in process, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes, it's a missed opportunity.
It also seems with the Mechanoids that they're a little bit... They're not the Mechanoids we know from The Chase, which seem to be like human slaves, well, human-built robots that were just there to set up a planet, to basically terraform a planet for people, and then they'd just been left there and sort of gone rogue. In this, they very much just seem like a mechanical race of aliens from another mechanical planet.
They are much more Dalek-y. They have these big meetings where one mechanoid addresses everybody else, and they talk a lot about conquest. They're a much more military kind of a threat than they are in the actual TV show. I mean, part of me now think, that would have been quite interesting because you've got the Daleks who are so emotional all the time against these kind of impassive sort of like mechanoids just sort of like defeating them and just saying nothing but a string of ones and noughts.
Obviously, as a kid, you wouldn't know that the mechanoids weren't coming back. And then you get the next adventure, the Terracan Harvest, which is sort of a bit of a Godzilla ripoff, but not a lot really happens in it. After that, we move into one called Legacy of Yesteryear, which is one of my favourites of the strip, where years after all the humanoid Daleks, or Khalids as they would have been known in the TV series, but they're never called that here, have all been wiped out and they've all been converted into Daleks. We suddenly get 3 of them awakened from suspended animation in a mountain.
It's a fascinating one. I agree. It's one of my favourites as well. And it feels unusually sophisticated, really, for a children's comic to have this kind of reaching back continuity.
Also, within the 3 humanoid Daleks that are awoken, you can still see traces of the Daleks because they're all trying to outdo each other and screw each other over. There's only one of them that seems like a good guy. The other 2 are sort of nasty pieces of work.
That's true. It goes back to that thing originally that the Thals were the really nice ones, sort of like Dals were the nasty gnome-like creatures. Although in this strip they've actually been lengthened out a bit. In the first strip they're quite sort of trolley-looking.
Yeah.
And this one they're more human proportions and just the kind of the big heads, that Star Trek thing of, they've got big heads so they're intelligent sort of race.
It has one of my favourite things in that one of the sentences that a Dalek opens a sentence and he just goes, "Bah, this Zet is no use to us." And it just, whether he's calling somebody else Bah or whether it's just him exclaiming something, it's just a beautiful thing to see a Dalek do.
Yes, absolutely. It is. And it doesn't feel out of character. Certainly within this comic strip continuity.
No.
That with these emotional Daleks that you would get exclamations like that.
As we kind of discover, like, Doctor Who fans are obsessed with canon. When this was being done, there was no such thing as canon and nobody cared. But this does give you, in the next few stories, very much like if you need to get it all into one thing, one continuity, this is very much a separate universe, because at one point they talk about Earth being in a different universe. Now, that was probably just because people didn't really know the difference between universes and galaxies or whatever, or didn't care. But like, if you really need to fit this into your Doctor Who continuity, you can go, these are not the Daleks of the TV series.
That is a handy and, as you say, probably accidental, but a handy little loophole.
Yeah.
I think that's probably another reason this story like that, because you get that continuity of reaching back to the beginning of the strip, but it also has that tie-in, the Dalek story to come, the Dalek of Earth, which we'll come to shortly.
And this is I notice on this one, they lose the written by Terry Nation. So for the last few stories, there's no Terry Nation name. He's finally been kicked off after not doing any work for months, probably.
Whether that's a specific renegotiation or just an art design
Yeah.
editor saying we need a better logo.
Who knows? Who knows? That's probably lost to history now. And I think this is the first story where they mention Earth. I could be wrong, but I think that was the first time I noticed it.
Yes, this is the first time. Yes, so far it's all been taking place far away from Earth.
But very soon and very quickly, the Daleks become quite obsessed with Earth in this comic strip. We move on to next a little 4-part story called Shadow of Humanity, where some Daleks are sent to the Lake of Mutation to clear flowers, which I think is great. and they come back questioning orders and protecting the wildlife.
I love this story. This might be my favourite story because because it's such a clever, again, for a children's comic. It's quite a sophisticated idea, and it's in some ways, it's a dry run for what we were going to see in Evil of the Daleks, which is Dalek society cannot cope with this kind of, and you get this Dalek eco warrior who wants to defend the environment the only way a Dalek knows how.
It's so. I've said this before about other things, of saying it's so 60s, but this is full on flower power. You get a Dalek that wears flowers, that puts flowers on him to sort of as a sign that he's different.
Yeah, that is. I love that idea. It is again, it's that beautiful. It's great children's logic. That's a beautiful, simple way of showing this Dalek is different to where this Dalek is. He's wearing flowers, and the fact that proves to be his undoing, stuff like this at the end of the story, is actually quite a nice, ingenious bit of writing.
It's a clever little tale, and again, 4 parts. That's 4 pages, and that's all it is. But there's some very striking imagery. It's a tight little story, and it sticks in the mind more than some of the other ones.
It's one that It's the one I tend to quote to people when I'm saying how good this Dalek strip is. Apart from the amazing artwork and stuff, is that they had a story where a Dalek becomes an eco warrior and starts questioning everything.
After that, it's the Emissary of Javo, which is real filler and largely forgettable, as I think we both agree. The final one of the original run is known as Road to Conflict, and it sees a human ship crash on Skaro. The Daleks destroy the ship, 3 humans escape from the blown-up ship and escape back to Earth in a Dalek ship, but the Daleks at the end find a burnt bit of paper with instructions on how to get to Earth.
I like this one a lot. It's it's another one showing the viciousness of the Daleks. Now they're up against humans again. They wipe out a whole ship of people without much negotiation. It's a very short story, and I love that little bit of continuity that they find the location of Earth.
That's a sort of end of the series in a way. There's nothing else that they do in TV 21, but it is, from what I understand, it was meant to be a cliffhanger that would lead straight into Dalek's Invasion of Earth 2150 AD, the film.
I was thinking, because that didn't make sense in terms of the TV programme, looking at the dates, but in terms of the film, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, so you could almost imagine the Peter Cushing films fitting into this universe.
Definitely, because Ron Turner has kind of used the movie Daleks as his template. So it does, in some ways, it does feel. That's an interesting idea, that it's continuity of the movie universe.
Which is great. But I do feel a little robbed that we don't see the Daleks invade the Earth.
It would have been, you could just imagine the next strip with various London, world landmarks being destroyed by the Daleks and subjugated humans and some sort of, and of course, because they wouldn't be able to use the Doctor, this would have been a humans have to fight off the Dalek invasion story.
Yeah.
And I think that would have been very, I would have loved to have seen that.
Now, there was talk of trying to revive this series by John Lawrence later in like the 70s, I think it was, but it never really went anywhere.
No, sadly, in that sort of the sort of mini Dalekmania
Yeah.
of the 70s. But and that's a shame, and in some ways, at least, it went out on a high. Yeah,
Yeah.
nice body of work there. Yes, it's a shame in a way it couldn't be. I must admit I haven't read it, but I believe there was a short revival in Doctor Who magazine. That must have that also happened at a time when I wasn't buying it.
Now that revival was Ron Turner, one of the original artists, who became interested in continuing the TV21 series during a lull in work, and he produced a sample page, but unfortunately he died before he could complete it.
That is sad. That's sad to know.
It ends on a great cliffhanger, and as you say, it's a great body of work. But it would have been nice to just see, as you say, that final battle. And if they could have somehow got a battle on Earth with Daleks and mechanoids over even just like 8 pages, you could have a wonderful sort of finishing story.
It almost writes itself. You can imagine that the humans bring in the mechanoids and then find out they're as bad as the Daleks.
It's got a great legacy, I think. Those comics, and even as a fan, I grew up as a fan in the 90s. Those images were everywhere, and I think they're burnt into the minds of Doctor Who fans, certainly from 60s right through to the 90s and early noughties.
Absolutely. I think the Dalek strips inform anyone who's written for the TV series. That sense of what the Daleks were doing when they weren't fighting the Doctor, this great Dalek empire out there that we only hear referred to. Certainly in my mind, it looks like the TV21 strips. Even in the time of the new series, when Character Options made a Dalek Invasion of Earth set, it's got a Dalek hover disc in it as an accessory. And, something that's never appeared in the TV series, somehow we all know about that.
Yeah, they're kind of part and parcel with the Daleks, the same as the Golden Emperor. They sit in people's minds, and it's the sort of thing that I think a member of the general public who grew up watching Doctor Who in the 70s or something would just assume was in the series because they remember it from somewhere, even though it never was.
In the series, certainly the Dalek sources of the new series have a very TV21 look to them, with those globes underneath them as they go across that. So they look very Ron Turner to me.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe they'll draw other things from the series in the future. Maybe not the mechanoids coming back to defeat the Daleks as I want, but maybe some of the other ideas will get drawn upon at some point.
It would be nice. Apparently, they were going to have the Dalek Emperor in Remembrance. Originally was going to have an eye stalk.
Oh, right.
It didn't work. When they actually saw it in real life, they felt it didn't quite work. It looked too... for some reason, they felt it looked comical.
Oh, that's a shame.
That's why it has the glowing panel instead.
But, I live in hope that we'll get a big round-headed Dalek one day in the TV series. So, Gareth, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. And if people want to find you online, can they find you on Twitter?
Yes, you can find me at GazHack.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for coming on. As I said, this has been Doctor Who Too Hot for TV, taking a little meander into the comics with a special guest. And we'll have to get you back on sometime soon to talk about something else, Gaz.
I would love it. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Doctor Who. Too hot for TV.